Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. I see our numbers climbing up here, so I'm just going to give it a few moments before we actually get started. But as always, it's so great to be here and to be offering you a session on budgeting for graduate school specifically today. We'll get started in just a few moments. All right, it looks like our numbers are finished climbing, so I say we get started. Thanks again for tuning in. Today's session is specifically on budgeting for graduate school. We did host a financial aid session earlier this fall on merit versus need-based aid, and we will remind you of that a little bit later in this presentation. But this is our second session with our financial aid team who's joining us to provide you with information on budgeting for graduate school. So thanks again for tuning in. My name is Alessandra Ludeking, and I'm the admissions officer here at Harvard Divinity School. I've been with HDS for a little over 6 months now, but have been with the Harvard community a few more years as an admissions officer at Harvard Law School as well prior to this role. Again, it's a great joy to be here with you all, and especially joined by my very esteemed colleague, Beth Flaherty, who I will let introduce herself. Thank you, Beth.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Flaherty. I'm the Director of Financial Aid at HDS, and I've been here almost 16 years. So hopefully I have some information that will be helpful to you about the process for not only applying for financial aid, but also for how to prepare your budgets for graduate school, wherever you may end up attending.
Thanks, Beth. All right, so those of you who have joined us before for previous sessions, you know that at this point, Beth and I are going to be turning our cameras off as we go through our presentation for today, just to help focus attention on our presentation. And then, of course, we'll be back for a frequently asked questions portion of today's presentation, as well as a Q&A. So we definitely want to save time for any questions that you might have. So if you do have any, please feel free to use the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to save time for those questions. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off, and we will get started. All right, so Harvard Divinity School was founded in 1816, and it is the first divinity school in the United States, and was also founded as a non-sectarian or non-religiously affiliated school of religious and theological studies that educate students both in the academic study of religion as well as the practice of religion for leadership in governmental, religious, and a wide range of service organizations. We have over 45 faith traditions represented in our student body, including, of course, those who are not religiously affiliated, and over 500 recurring worship services. And altogether, this makes Harvard Divinity School the most religiously pluralistic divinity school in the world. Our applicants often wonder what career paths are available to students with a religious graduate degree. And I can confidently say that our programs lead to infinite pathways with alumni in every field and industry, all of whom value ethical leadership, religious literacy, they're service-oriented and mission-driven. Graduates often describe developing skills such as deep listening, ethical reasoning, bridging divides successfully, and navigating difficult conversations. So that's a quick overview of HDS. I also wanted to provide you with a snapshot of who's actually here. What are our students like? So this is information on our first year class that was admitted in the most recent cycle. As you can see, we have 96 Master of Theological students. It is our most popular master's degree, and I'll touch base on the 4 of them in just a little bit. We also have 52 Master of Divinity students, MDiv. We have 12 Master of Religion and Public Life, 4 special students, and 2 Master of Theology students. Within our incoming class, 55% identify as female, 34% as male, and 7% as non-binary. The average age is 28, and as you can see, with a span of 21 to 68 years. As I mentioned earlier, we have over 45 religious traditions represented, 46 to be exact, and 62 languages spoken. I should add that our first year class is comprised of 165 students. So I'm particularly proud of that statistic in the middle there. Of 165 students, 121 undergraduate institutions are represented. So that's just a quick overview of what our first year class looks like. I also wanted to touch base on our degree programs, as you heard me allude to a little bit earlier. So the MTS, or the Master of Theological Studies, offers a broad study in religion with opportunities to concentrate in one of 18 areas of focus. Students interested in the MTS are generally preparing for a doctoral program in religion or some related discipline, or they're looking to approach another field or profession such as law, journalism, public policy, education, arts, medicine, all from a perspective enriched by theological studies. We do have generous institutional grant aid available for the MTS program. In addition to the MTS, we offer the Master of Divinity or the MDiv, and this is for 21st century spiritual leaders. So these are students who are interested in learning the arts of ministry, a lowercase m here. We define ministry very broadly. It's essentially any mission-driven, service-oriented work. Students will be learning preaching, pastoral care, and community organizing, and they'll be linking the theory that they get from their classroom experiences to practical fieldwork placements, somewhat like internships, in settings of their choice. This can be in a hospital, this can be in a congregation, this can be in a school, whatever your interest area is. And just like the MTS, we have very generous institutional grant aid available for the MDiv. Our third master's degree program is the Master of Theology. As you saw in the previous slide, we only have 2 students enrolled in that for this year. And that's because it's a little bit more of a niched program. It's 1 year full-time, and it's for those applicants who already have a Master of Divinity, and they're looking to explore a topic in greater depth that enriches their current ministerial work. And then we have our newest master's program, the Master of Religion and Public Life, or the MRPL. This is our second year offering this program. It's also 1 year full-time. And it's really unique. It's designed for mid-career professionals who just want to take a pause on their professional pursuits to come to Harvard Divinity School for 1 year and learn about the ways in which religion impacts their careers. And they develop the religious literacy skills to talk about religion within their professional settings. I should note that both the THM, the Master of Theology, and the MRPL do not have institutional grant aid available, but we do have federal funding options to choose from. And then, of course, we have our wonderful faculty who lead these master's degree program. It's no exaggeration to say that our faculty are among the most distinguished scholars of religion and practitioners of ministry in the world. We have over 80 faculty and guest lecturers teaching over 230 courses, and they're top scholars in their fields in Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and of course, many other traditions. As you can see, 54% of our faculty are tenured women, and more than 1/3 specialize in non-Christian traditions, or tenured women and faculty of color, I should say. So this is just a quick snapshot of our faculty. And then, of course, Harvard Divinity School wouldn't be what it is without our vibrant student community, that are students. So as you can see here, we have over 35 organizations. If I were being specific, it's really closer to 45. And it's also really easy to start your own student organization if there's something that doesn't exist that you think should. So some examples that come to mind for me are our Queer Rights Student Org, our Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, the HDS Garden Group, and Third Chapter, which is a group for students over 50 years old. And these student organizations host over 60 student-led events each year, in addition to the 500 recurring worship services that I mentioned earlier. So that's just a quick snapshot of student life at HDS. And then again, we did do a session that went into greater detail on our need-based and merit aid grant offerings at Harvard Divinity School, but I'll provide you with a very quick overview. As I mentioned, need-based and merit aid is available only to MTS and MDiv applicants. So please keep that in mind. The vast majority of our grant aid is need-based. So it's 90% of our applicants receive some sort of institutional grant aid. So we're very generous in our offerings. And need-based aid does require a financial aid application that becomes available sometime in early to mid-January. And important to note, this application becomes available only after the admissions application deadline has passed. And that is intentional, as the admissions committee will have no understanding or knowledge of what your financial need might be. That is the sole purview of the financial aid office. We do offer 3 levels of need-based aid. So that's a 3/4 tuition grant, which is the minimum baseline that we offer, as well as a full tuition grant, and then a full tuition grant with a living stipend for those with most need. And then we do have a very small pool of merit aid that is awarded based on the overall strength of the application for the MTS and MDiv. As I said, 90% of our applicants receive grant aid. Of those 90%, only 10% of those 90 will receive merit aid. And consideration is automatically evaluated by the admissions committee, so there's no formal application process. Everyone who applies will be automatically considered for this merit aid. If you are granted merit aid, then this will include a full tuition with modest stipend. All financial aid decisions are released either in your admissions letter or within 24 hours of your admissions letter. So that's important to note. And then here we have some resources. Again, if you do have any particular questions on merit versus need-based aid, I highly recommend that you look at this video that we have on our YouTube. There's a link there for you. Our director of financial aid, Beth, you'll get to chat with in more detail. Really provides some wonderful information. We also have a great blog post on managing your finances at HDS if you do have questions about how our current students have navigated this process themselves, as we fully understand that graduate school can be an expensive investment. So then really quickly on how to apply. I won't go into too much depth in our application components, as we have been hosting virtual sessions that break each of these down into much greater detail. But I will highlight in specific the interview, which is a new application feature for our cycle this year. These are extended by invitation only, and these will be conducted virtually. Interviews will be sent out sometime around late January, early February. Important to note that every admitted student is required to interview, but not every applicant will be invited to interview. Quick note on our timeline here, our application has been opened and it closes the first week of January. We do not operate on a rolling admissions basis, so please feel free to submit your application anytime that you'd like within our deadline. We will not actually begin the review process until after January 6th. So you could even submit your application on that date, and it will have absolutely no bearing on any grant aid available to you or on the timing of your admissions decision, which will be released in mid-March. All right, so I've done plenty of talking. I would love to cede the floor to my colleague, Beth Flaherty, who will talk us through her tips and advice for budgeting for graduate school. So Beth, I invite you to turn your camera back on, and I'll mute myself, and thank you for sharing with us your advice and tips.
Thank you, Alessandra. Welcome, everyone. We're thrilled to have you joining us today for budgeting for graduate school. We're going to first do a couple of housekeeping things, and then we'll get into the bulk of the presentation, which is really just to talk about budgeting and how to make it possible for preparing for graduate study wherever you end up going. So I just want to briefly touch on the deadline for the need-based financial aid. As Alessandra said, we have two programs. We have the merit-based award, which all students are automatically considered for, and then the need-based financial aid, which students have to apply for. We highly recommend that all students apply for need-based aid, because in the event that you're not chosen for merit aid, you can automatically be considered for need-based aid. Need-based aid is also open to all students, both domestic students, international students, and undocumented students. The application process for US citizens or eligible non-citizens would include the free application for federal student aid, which is the FAFSA, and the HDS application for financial aid. International and undocumented students will simply fill out the HDS application for financial aid. And our deadline is Wednesday, February 9th, 2022. And that's a hard deadline, so please make sure that you get your information in. The FAFSA does take a couple of business days to process. So if you fill it out on the 9th, we won't have it on the 9th. So we do recommend that you try to get that filled out a few days before, so that we can have it by February 9th. If there are any things that come up that might prohibit you from making that deadline, family emergency, some unforeseen circumstance, please be in touch with our office. We may be able to offer you a little bit of flexibility, but what I don't recommend doing is just ignoring the deadline and then hoping later on that you can apply, because what often happens is if you don't meet the deadline, we typically aren't able to award financial aid to students that apply late. So it's really important that you do fill out all the information by the requested date. Another question we often get from students is that they're not sure if they'll qualify for need-based aid. My suggestion is let us make that determination. Don't self-determine whether or not you think you'll be eligible, because oftentimes we have students that make mistakes and assume they won't be eligible when in reality they would have been. So let us decide if you're eligible or not eligible. And again, making sure that you get the information to us by the deadline is imperative. We will go out with an email, usually within a week of the passing of the admissions application deadline. We send you an email, and we also send multiple reminders about information that we still require from you. If for some reason you don't get any email communication from the financial aid office by the end of January, please reach out to us directly and we'll make sure that we resend the information to you. On occasion, our emails do go to spam or junk mail folders, so it's also important to check those as well. But as I said, if you don't have something from financial aid by the end of January, make sure you reach out to us directly. I did want to just briefly touch on the cost of attendance for the academic year. Students are often curious about what does it cost to attend, and so it's helpful to provide that information. I do want to tell you that this is based on 21-22 costs. We have not yet determined the cost for 22-23. Typically, tuition can go up slightly, and your living expense budget will go up as well as the health insurance fees. So this is a ballpark idea, but know that it won't be exactly the same for 22-23. We break it down. I think about it in two different sections. I think about your tuition and mandatory fees. So at the top, we list tuition, the Blue Cross Blue Shield, the University Health Services fee, and the student activity fees. Those are the actual billable costs that you'll get a bill from the university for. The second half is your living expense budget. And as you can see, it's pretty much a bare bones budget. The Department of Education requires us to come up with what we think is a pretty good estimate of what it will cost a student to attend for an academic year. At HDS, the academic year is September through May. Summer is not an official period of enrollment, so we can only include costs for the academic year. So we have an estimate of what we think it costs for food, housing, books, and miscellaneous expenses. So even though the total says $61,052, some students are going to be able to live for far less than that for the academic year, and for other students, they're going to choose to live for far more. So this is just a ballpark idea. And for some students, if you find a great housing option, you can certainly do this for less. I do also want to call your attention to the Blue Cross Blue Shield. That's the individual health insurance plan. So if a student is currently covered under their own plan, either be it a parent plan or a private plan, and will continue to be covered for the academic year, they can waive the Blue Cross Blue Shield and will remove that from their bill and also from their cost of attendance. The University Health Services fee, which is the smaller of the two fees, that's if you get sick on campus and need to go to the doctor. It also covers the mental health counseling. That fee is not waivable for any student. So let's get into the bulk of the presentation, which is budgeting for grad school. A lot of this information might be things that you already know, but for many of you, if you've never done a budget before, or you're not someone that budgets regularly, I hope it will be information that will just give you little nuggets of wisdom, things that will help you to prepare for making an easier transition to graduate school, because it is a big financial commitment. So what's a budget? A budget is a spending plan that you decide on. It's based on how much you make or how much you have coming in and what your monthly expenses are. By understanding your monthly income and expenses, you'll be better able to manage your cash flow and determine how much debt, if any, you can assume. So why don't you keep a budget? This is something that I ask students all the time, and I get pretty much the same 4 or 5 answers all the time. I can keep track of everything in my head. I don't have any money, so no need to budget. It takes too much time. It depresses me. And my expenses are so simple, there's no need to track. But in reality, if you don't know what you're doing with your money, you're obviously going to spend it in ways that you may not intend to. So it is really important. Even if you think your expenses are simple, you want to make sure that you are keeping track of them. So reasons that I recommend that you budget is it's never too early to take charge of your financial future. Budgeting allows you to set financial goals, even if they're small. It allows you to see where your money's really going, and not having a budget is like driving a car without a steering wheel. So one of the major questions I get from students are, what do I need to take into consideration when I'm trying to come up with a budget? And so these tips here, I hope will be helpful to you regardless of where you're attending, whether it's here in Cambridge, at HDS, or some other school in some other part of the country. I think these are just good things to keep in mind. If you are applying to multiple graduate schools, start researching the areas. As many of you will know, if you've lived in different parts of the country, the living budget is drastically different. We find that, people come here and what they pay for a house in one part of the country, you can't get a closet for in the Boston area. So it's really important that you do some research to get an idea of what the average rent is in the area. Also, look at the schools that you're considering and see, do they have campus housing as options? And if they do, is it affordable? There are some places where it's more affordable to live off campus. There are some schools where they don't have their own on-campus housing. At HDS, we don't have dormitory housing. The only housing that HDS owns is the Center for the Study of World Religion. And that's more of an intentional housing option where students have to apply and be accepted to live there, and it's apartment style, but it isn't discounted. Harvard University itself does have some housing, and we'll talk about this later on. But how affordable those are can vary. The dormitory options are a little more affordable. Some of the apartments, depending upon what you can find, sometimes they're fairly affordable, sometimes they're very expensive. So you should be casting a wide net when you're thinking about where you want to live and how much you're willing to pay. Also think about commuting options if you're choosing to live outside the school's general area in the hope of finding cheaper rent. We do have students that sometimes make that decision, but there are downsides to that. Oftentimes your commute to campus is much longer, so it's taking you a lot longer. Depending upon where you're living, you may not be on a major commuting route, which means that you might have to drive to a train station or a commuter rail, and those trains may not run as frequently as a city bus does. So you have to keep that into consideration, especially in the evening time. In the morning during rush hour commute, you might have no problem getting to campus, but getting home at night, because the routes don't run as frequently, it might be more problematic. So those are just things that you have to consider. Sometimes living further away doesn't always reduce your cost, because it could increase your transportation expenses. So just things to think about. Also think about, is there reliable public transportation, and do they run on multiple schedules? And how long of a commute are you willing to make? Some students choose to make, say, an hour commute, but that also can play into how easy it is for them to get to campus. Sometimes they find that they have to miss events in the evening because they don't have reliable transportation to get back, because the schedules don't run as frequently. So there's a lot of things that play into it. So I recommend really thinking long and hard about what's important to you as part of your experience. I also would highly recommend that students think twice about whether or not bringing a car is worth it, because depending upon what part of the country you are and whether or not you're in the city, that it could actually be more hindrance than help. So in the Boston area, particularly in Cambridge, not all of the apartments that you're going to rent are going to come with off-street parking. So many places don't have parking garages, or they don't have driveways. And so in order for you to be able to park your car, you have to get a parking permit through the city or town that you're living in, which typically those aren't super expensive. But one thing that students often say to me, particularly those who feel like they have to bring a car, they'll say, well, it doesn't matter, I'm not going to change my plates. I'm going to keep with the insurance in the state that I live in. But that's not going to work if you have to get a city parking permit, because most of the city and towns are going to require you to have Massachusetts plates in order to get a parking permit. So you would have to switch your insurance here, and depending upon where you're coming from, you could be rudely awakened as to how much insurance can cost in this part of the country. Also, in terms of maintenance and car payments, that just adds to your budget. So it's often not really helpful to have a car. Certainly, the choice is going to be up to you, but we would recommend, if you can live without it, to leave it, or maybe you could just sell it, and that certainly could put you in a position where that would free up some cash for other parts of your budget. It's always a good idea to start thinking now about moving costs. It can be very costly depending upon where you're coming from, so you need to have a plan for how you're going to cover those costs. And also, you will have to budget for things like furniture, warm clothing, boots, etc. If you're coming from warmer climates, you'll be surprised that a light coat is not going to make it for the winters in Boston. So you want to be prepared for what those will cost, and make sure that you have them so that you're not surprised. Because the weather here can be crazy. One day it's 65 degrees and then it's 30. So you want to make sure that you have what you need to be prepared. So the hardest thing I think about budgeting is, where do you start? When I have budgeting sessions, and I'm always happy to have budgeting sessions with students, the first thing I say to a student is, when we set up a time to meet, send me a copy of your budget so that I can sort of see where we're at. And I would say 9 times out of 10, I get a budget that has rent and utilities. I don't always get utilities, and typically nothing else. So then we have to have a conversation about, okay, well, what other things are things that you're paying for on a regular basis? So what you really have to do is sit down and think about, what are the things that you pay for on a very regular basis? So your rent, your utilities, your food, do you have medications that you take on a monthly basis? Do you have a gym membership? Those are things that you really want to sit down and be very specific about. And then you also want to think about what your other expenses are. And these are usually areas where you might have a little bit more wiggle room. So cable, transportation, entertainment, cell phone. It's not to say that you're not going to continue to have these expenses while you're in school, but maybe you don't get premium cable and perhaps you get a bike instead of bringing a car. So this enables you to sort of think about some choices that you might want to make. So one of the best ways to kind of work out the details about a budget is to track your spending. And I don't know if any of you have done this, but I find it really, really valuable to track your spending for 30 days. And I don't do this every month, but I try to do this a couple of times a year just to keep myself honest. I do keep a monthly budget. I have an idea of what I think I'm spending, but things can change. You know, there are some months where I'm not spending nearly as much on gas, and then all of a sudden the gas prices spike up, and then all of a sudden I feel like I'm overspending in gas, but there are other areas in my budget that I can adjust to kind of bring myself back to breaking even. But it's really helpful to know what you're spending your money on. I will give you a couple of personal examples of how I've wasted money that I didn't actually know I was wasting. You know, I've been in financial aid well over 20 years. I've done all sorts of, you know, I've presented and I've participated in all sorts of budgeting workshops. And probably 13 or 14 years ago, I thought, you know what, I'm going to track my expenses for an entire month and see if I'm really spending what I'm budgeting. So there were two areas that really jumped out for me. First of all, I knew I was going to Starbucks 5 days a week. I had no idea how much I was spending at Starbucks. If you had asked me, I would have said about $25 to $30 a month. And it turns out I was spending well over $100 a month. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't ever go to Starbucks, but I actually have an item in my budget for coffee, and I know how much I should be spending. And then periodically, I go back every couple of months, track my expenses, and sort of get a sense of, is that what I'm really doing? It's not that, you know, I like to go out for coffee, but I don't need to spend all of that money on coffee because that's money that I am not spending on other things that are more important to me than that. So it's really important to really track your expenses to get a sense as to what you're doing. The other area for me was food. So this is before I had a child, but I had in my budget that I spent at the time, you know, $50 to probably $60 a month for food just for home for myself. But I had no idea if I was actually spending that. So one Saturday morning, I went to the grocery store with a calculator, and I started picking out the things I would normally purchase, and I started putting into my calculator, and I got a third of the way through the supermarket and realized that I had accounted for more than the $50 and I did not have a week's worth of groceries. So I went back to the beginning, I put everything back, and then I started looking at what was I buying and realized I was choosing all of the name brands. I was choosing the things that were right on my sight line, which are generally the things that are more expensive. And so if you look up or you look down, that's usually where the lesser priced items are, because supermarkets are trying to catch your attention. So they're putting the higher priced things right at your sight line. I went back, I started looking at the generic brands. Turns out for, I would say 99% of things that I buy, the name brand or the generic version doesn't make a difference to me. It all kind of tastes the same. So I went back, I bought the generic brands. I got all the way through the supermarket, spent $50, had a week's worth of groceries. Now, again, that was probably 13 or 14 years ago. You know, I would spend more as a single person than $50 a week, but that's just an example of how you can be spending your money when you just don't really keep track of what you're doing. I think another big mistake that people make is that they are not detailed enough in their budgets. So one of the recommendations I have is if you have a transportation budget, break it down by individual items. So not just transportation, but how much you spend on public transportation. If you have a car payment, what's that? Your car insurance, your gas, your maintenance, your repairs, parking, tolls, parking tickets. We have lots of students that bring cars here and get lots of parking tickets. So you really want to be aware of how you're spending your money. And this is a good way to gauge, what areas do I need to cut back on, or what areas do I need to increase spending for. By breaking down each category, again, you really see where your money's going. It allows you to cut back on the categories. It allows you to cut back on things that you don't need, or also reevaluate categories that need to be increased. And again, I find many people are really surprised at the amount of money that they waste. And tracking really allows you to determine if you want to continue to make the same choices, or if your current choices are in line with your overall goals. So I'll give you another personal experience. So many years ago, I had been out of college for a couple of years. I needed a new car. When I decided to buy the car, to me, it was important to buy a new car because I'm not someone that handles cars breaking down very well. So when I've had older cars and they break down a lot, it causes me a lot of anxiety and frustration. So I thought, I'm going to buy a new car and I'm going to buy a Camry. I did not really think about what the monthly payment was going to be. I could afford to make the payment, but I didn't think about the other things that I wouldn't be able to do because I took on a big car payment. So, I was younger. I didn't have much of a credit history, so I certainly didn't get a great interest rate. And so my payments were much, much higher than they should have been. And that was a really valuable lesson to me. First of all, I resented that car payment for every single month that I made it. And I made that car payment for 6 years. And I was lucky I could make the car payment. But every month I had to think about the other things that I was choosing not to do because I had taken on this car payment. When that car was finally paid off, I drove it until it wouldn't run anymore. But I spent the next several years thinking about how I would approach car buying when I had to buy a car again. And when I did have to eventually buy another car, I did not base it on the kind of car I wanted. I based it on the kind of car payments I wanted to afford. So I made a budget, I looked at what I could afford, and then I determined what kind of car. At that point I had a child and I thought it would be great to have a minivan or an SUV. And then when I looked at what those car payments would be, I thought, you know what, a pre-owned Corolla actually makes much more sense for me. And that's what I did. And that, I think, worked much better for me. It also allowed me to continue to do the things in my life that were important to me. Of course, having reliable transportation is important, but it doesn't have to be the best and the biggest. It just needs to be something reliable that will get you from point A to point B. And I really wish I had thought about that when I was in my early 20s, because I would have I could have been making much different decisions. So some really important questions to ask yourself when you're making a budget is, do I need it? If I think I do, how have I managed to live without it so far? What will happen if I don't buy it? And if I can't pay cash for it, what will it really cost me? Because I think oftentimes, we put things on credit cards because they're convenient. You can, there are often reasons why you would do that. Lots of cashback programs and the sense that you're going to earn money for things that you're going to buy anyway. But if you can't pay that credit card off every month, it's not actually saving you any money to do it that way. So you do want to be thoughtful about, are you making good choices? And does it make sense to put it on a credit card if you can't pay it off immediately from month to month? I have these questions. I ask these questions to myself, but this is also something that I do with my daughter. My daughter Grace is 12. When she was younger, we would have these conversations essentially every time we would walk into a Target. She would look at something and say, oh, I need it. So then we would start having conversations about, okay, well, what's a need versus a want? And so then we would talk about that, a toy is not a want, it's a need. It's not a need, it's a want, excuse me. So we'd have these conversations about what were things that were important. If you really want this thing, do you have the money for it? Are you willing to do the extra work to do it? Oftentimes, if I was willing to pay for it, that was great. But if I said, well, let's go home and get your birthday money, or I can give you a couple of extra jobs and you can earn money for this, she wasn't so interested in that. She also got very smart in the sense that she started to realize, like, oh, well, clothes and shoes. I have to have clothes and shoes. So we go into the store and she'd say, well, Mom, these are shoes. This is a need. And I would say, okay, yes, shoes are a need, but 8 pairs of princess shoes are not needs. Those are wants. So then we go back to, if that's something that's important to you, then you have to use your own money or you're going to have to do some extra chores for it. And 9 times out of 10, we would never do that. It can get turned on you. I was in Target with her. I was looking at a purse. I didn't see her come up next to me and she said, oh, that's a nice purse. Do you like it? And I said, oh yeah, I really like it a lot. She said, oh, so is that a want or a need? And I said, oh, it's a want. And she said, okay, so you're going to go home, think about it, decide if you really need it, maybe put it in the budget for next month. And I went, oh yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And the truth is I never went back and bought that purse because I didn't need it. But I think we all need those reminders of the things that are important. It doesn't mean that you're never, ever going to buy something that you want. You just want to think more carefully about when you do it. So we're going to have a little hypothetical case scenario, and this is going to be revolved around housing. So in this case, you've been admitted to HDS. Congratulations. You're going to get a full tuition scholarship. You have saved $3,000 that you'll be using for your first, last, and security. So that's already going to be taken care of. You're hoping to get a work-study job and work about 10 hours a week at about $19 an hour. You're still going to be covered under your parents' health plan in this particular scenario, so you won't have to worry about that, and you can waive the Blue Cross Blue Shield medical health insurance. And all of your other expenses are going to need to come from student loans. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at what can you get for that money. So again, for student loans, if you're relying on, you're going to borrow $20,500 in Stafford loans, that works out to about $20,283 for the year after the 1.057% processing fee. Your work study earnings will be about $6,000 from September to May. That's the maximum work study allocation that we give. So your yearly, and when I say yearly, I mean the academic year, so September to May, your yearly living expense money would be $26,283. I also think it's helpful to think about this in semesters. So when you borrow student loans, they are equally dispersed into 2 semesters. You get half in the fall, half in the spring. The fall portion will come in usually after the classes begin. So you're not going, it's very important to understand, you're not going to have access to your student loans prior to classes beginning. So you should come prepared with a couple of weeks at least of living expenses so that you're not caught off guard. So in the case of working out this scenario into semesters, you'll get about $10,141 in student loans minus the processing fees. The work study, just for ease of the discussion, we're going to say you're going to earn $3,000 from September to December. That can vary depending on the student and how many hours you're working. But for our purposes, you're going to have about $13,141 for the fall semester. Out of that, we're going to subtract out $500 for books. You may or may not spend that, but it's a good idea to just kind of take that off the top. And then we're going to subtract out $656, which is the university health services fee and the activity fee. So the amount that you have to live on, and this is basically going to cover you from September to the end of January, because you won't get your spring disbursement until very end of January, beginning of February. You'll have about $11,985 to live on. So where do you want to live? Well, this looks like a perfectly nice apartment. So let's see, is this a place in Cambridge that you can afford to live in? So this is $1,950 a month. It's located in Cambridge. It's a 1-bedroom with in-unit washer and dryer and air conditioning. It's a 17-minute walk to HDS, and it's also on a major bus route. It's 629 square feet, heat and hot water is included, and you can park for an additional $44 a month. And as I mentioned earlier, some apartments will not come with parking. So even if the building comes with parking spaces, sometimes they're going to charge you an additional fee for that. So those are things to be on the lookout when you're looking at apartments. So let's look at what your monthly financial obligations are. And again, this is our hypothetical case. So rent is $19.50. We're estimating utilities of about $100 a month. That can vary. It'll be less in the warmer months, more in the winter months. Parking, we're assuming that you're going to bring a car, so you're going to have parking. You're going to have car insurance. I didn't include a car payment, but that very well could be something that a student has as well. Internet, cell phone plan, medications and co-pays, and MBTA bus pass if you're living in the Boston area, an estimate for food and toiletries. We're assuming that you're having some credit card payments. So let's say this is a $5,000 balance and you're paying about $200 a month on that. You have Netflix and entertainment and eating out. I'd also say that when students do budgets, they never do things like entertainment and eating out. I don't know if they do that because they are afraid to tell me that they spend money on these things. But it's important to be honest about what's in your budget. Like, don't give me a budget that says that you spend $1,000 when you actually spend $3,000 a month, because I can't help you with that. You need to be realistic. Now, if your entertainment budget is $1,000 a month, then, you know, I likely would point out that that probably is more than you should be spending at that point. But it's not unrealistic to have things in your budget. Like, if it is important for you to work out and have a gym membership, put it in your budget. If it's important to go to a yoga class because that helps with your mental health. If you have dietary restrictions that require you to shop at Whole Foods, make sure that you account for that in your budget. I'm not saying don't do those things. I'm saying you're going to make different decisions on other parts of your budget to make those things that are necessary for you happen on a regular basis. So based on this, your expenses would be over $3,100 a month. And so that would not work with what you have coming in for work study funds and student loan proceeds. So you're going to have to make a different decision. This is why it's really important to do a budget before you sign a lease or make housing arrangements. And I find that is without question the #1 mistake that students make. They sign on the dotted line and then they figure out how to pay for it. And what you want to do first is figure out how to pay for it and then sign on it. So how can you make a different choice? One of the things that you could do is choose to live outside of Cambridge. So in this particular scenario, this would be living in a 3-bedroom apartment in Somerville. So you'd have 1 bedroom and a 3-bedroom and pay $1,025 a month. You would share those, you know, your monthly utilities, assuming that heat and hot water were not included. So you'd share them and have about 1/3 of the utilities. You would still have your cell phone plan, your internet, your medications, bus pass, food and toiletries, entertainment, Netflix, all of that. But what we've also done is cut out the car insurance, because we're assuming that you're not going to bring a car, and so you wouldn't also need to pay to park it. And then we're also making the assumption that maybe you've been able to pay off your credit card prior to enrolling, and then that will free up some additional money. So this would give you monthly expenses of about $1,845 a month, and that would certainly work within what you have if you're relying on student loans. May also allow you to borrow a little bit more than the allow you to borrow a little less than the $20,500. And it also gives you a little flexibility. So if something happens or something comes up, or there's an extra book that you need to buy, or you want to travel home for the holidays, it gives you a little wiggle room and ability to have some room if something comes up. Other things to consider, we always recommend casting a wide net for housing. So just because the school is in a particular town doesn't necessarily mean you have to live in that town. You could live slightly outside of that. So we recommend that students look outside of Cambridge proper. You can sometimes find a great deal in Cambridge. But we're right on the Somerville line. We're close to Arlington, Watertown, Brighton, Alston. Students can often find better housing deals if they're willing to go a little bit outside of the general area. Moving, as we said before, it can be very expensive. It can be anywhere from a few $100s to a few $1,000s to relocate. So make sure that you start looking at those costs. What will it cost to rent a U-Haul if you have to drive across country? What will it cost if you're going to need to stay in a hotel? What will the tolls be? What will the gas be? What will food along the way? You want to make sure that you understand all of those costs. Sometimes you elect not to, drive across country. Sometimes you buy a plane ticket. You take as much luggage as you can, and then you ship the other things that are required. But it's important to just start thinking about how you think you might handle that. You'll need to have startup costs. Most apartments will require first, last, and security deposits, and some apartments, particularly in our area, may also require a broker's fee, which can be equivalent to a month's worth of rent. So make sure that you're prepared for how you're going to handle those costs. And many landlords will also run a credit check. So if you have not checked your credit before, this is a great time to do it. And you can go to annualcreditreport.com and get a free credit report. You used to be able to get them once a year from all the credit reporting agencies. I would typically request one, and then 4 months later, I would choose this, another credit reporting. And then 4 months after that, I would choose the third one. But with the pandemic, you've actually been able to get them much more frequently. I don't know if that will continue, but definitely check your credit report. That's a great way for people also to find out if they've been a victim of identity fraud, because we have had a couple of students over the years who ran a credit check on themselves and then realized, someone has been using my identity and I am now responsible for things I didn't know. So it's important to make sure that you understand what's on your credit report. Starting up a new apartment can be expensive. So starting with the very basics and accepting secondhand items from family and friends is a good way to get yourself started. And then you can add things as you need them and as you have additional income. And as I've said a couple of times, avoid bringing a car if you can. So we have a couple of frequently asked questions. We asked for you all to submit some questions, and so we chose a couple to start off with. The first one is, what advice or considerations can you offer to students from out of state about moving expenses and ease of transition? In terms of moving expenses, I think paring down what you have is helpful. Just because you have a whole house full doesn't necessarily mean that you want to bring it here for the 2 or 3 years of your program, or 1 year if you're in one of the shorter masters. You may also want to consider looking for apartments that would that come with some level of furnishings. That would allow you to not have to transport heavy things like, bureaus and beds and things that will be harder to transport. So that's also a thought. You also will want to price out, depending upon how much you have to bring. Does it make sense to rent a U-Haul and drive it across the country? Or do you live close enough? Say, for example, if you're coming from New Hampshire, maybe you have a friend with a truck who would be willing to help you move. And that would be much less expensive. You just, buy pizza and beer and maybe pay for gas, that type of thing. I think it's also, you just want to be realistic about what the upfront costs are, because if you are renting a U-Haul, you generally have to provide payment for that. Sometimes you have to reserve it in advance and pay a portion of it. So you just want to have a sense of what you're going to do. We have some students that don't rent a U-Haul and they just choose the things that are most important and they ship them through UPS or through the Postal Service. So that's also an option as well. One thing I'll say about moving expenses is we don't provide grant assistance to help with moving expenses, but we can, on a case-by-case basis, look at your individual moving expenses and use that to increase your overall cost of attendance. And that would allow you to borrow student loans to cover some of those expenses. So you'd have to pay them out of pocket first, but you could look at borrowing student loans to reimburse yourself. And it does sometimes make sense to do that. Say, for example, if your only other option for moving expenses is to put it on a credit card. Credit cards have varying interest rates. So if you're putting that on a credit card with 15, 16, 17% interest, and you know you can't pay it off right away, it might make sense to take out a student loan, which is more in the 5 to 6% interest rate, and then use that money to pay off the credit card. So I think that's something to consider. And then the next question is there a dormitory near campus for HDS graduate students facilitated by Harvard? And what's the cheapest possible living situation at Harvard? So as I said earlier, HDS, aside from the CSWR, the Center for the Study of World Religions, we don't have our own housing. There are options for living in Harvard affiliated real estate. So there are a couple of options. One of them is to rent from Harvard Real Estate. So that is where Harvard essentially serves as your landlord. So Harvard owns a lot of apartment buildings in the area, and students can, when they've been admitted to a program, they can enter into a housing lottery that will allow them to choose apartments. The better lottery number you get, the lesser the lesser expensive the apartments will tend to be. If you have an early draw number, you're going to have lots of options of prices. If you're later on in the drawing, either the housing might be completely gone, or what's left could be very expensive. I've seen Harvard housing, if you can get in with roommates, it could be as little as $1,000 a month. Some students rent and live by themselves, and I've seen students pay upwards of, $2,500 or $3,000 a month. You don't have to pay that much for a 1-bedroom or a studio, but it's not unusual to see Harvard Real Estate for a studio or a 1-bedroom to go in the high like 1900s or low 2000. While HDS doesn't have dormitories, some of the other graduate schools at Harvard do. So the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences is one school that I can think of. The law school also has some of their own housing that's more dormitory style with a desk and bureau and a bed provided. And then also the Harvard Business School has some of their own dormitory housing. The important thing to keep in mind about that is that they will always give preference to their own students first, and then open it up to students at other schools. So it's not a guarantee that you would be able to rent from them, but certainly would be more affordable. Before the presentation, I was looking up some of the rents for the dormitories at the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, and those tended to be more in the $7,500 for the academic year. Some of them went as high as like $9,000 or so. If you're renting from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, it's also important to note that you also have to pay for a board plan, which is basically food, so 10 meals a week. So that's also in addition to the rent. If you are able to rent from the Harvard Business School, I don't believe they require you to buy a meal plan. But many of our students have taken advantage of those opportunities. But again, it's not guaranteed that every student will be able to do that. And then I just I know that we're coming up on, we're actually a minute past 1 o'clock, but I do want to just quickly look and see if there are any other questions. Oh, great. I'm glad that this was helpful to you. If there are other questions that come up that were not addressed in the presentation, or you just have general questions about applying for financial aid or the admissions process, please feel free to be in contact either with the financial aid office or the admissions office. We are more than happy to answer any questions. And as I always say to students, they often say, I don't want to ask because it's stupid, but the truth is that the question is probably not stupid. And even if it is, we're not going to tell you. So please ask us. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Alessandra, do you have anything you want to add?
No, thank you so much, Beth. That was really inspiring. You made me think about even ways in my life that I might be overspending and wasting my resources too. So I feel empowered and inspired to make my own budget. So I appreciate that. Thanks to those of you who are tuning in. This session was recorded, so it will be shared with you in an email shortly, and it will be posted to our YouTube channel as well. Again, I encourage you to check back on some of our sessions that we've recorded and posted, including, of course, the merit versus need-based aid session. That was really helpful. And thanks again. Please do feel free to email us. Truly, I'm so grateful to Beth and the financial aid team for being so available to you now. So ask away, and thanks again for tuning in. It was a pleasure. And thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.